Hello everyone, I'm Sophie Adams. I'm a social scientist at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm going to talk about the social and economic value associated with emerging decentralised energy business models from the point of view of their participants. So I'm referring here to a cluster of models that are defined in different ways and take different forms according to their specific contexts around the world. But they all tend to be characterised by small-scale participants, typically households or small businesses, with solar PV and possibly other energy technologies such as batteries or electric vehicles that are sharing and trading energy with one another. So I'll give you an overview of what the research to date tells us about this. This is based primarily on a systematic literature review conducted by myself and colleagues through the Global Observatory on Peer-to-Peer Community Self-Consumption and Transactive Energy associated with the International Energy Agency. But I'll also illustrate some of these issues with findings from my own research here in Australia. So in our systematic literature review, we looked at the forms of value in these models: peer-to-peer, community self-consumption, and transactive energy. It's worth noting that these were the forms of value that prospective participants are expected to access through these models and that can be realised in some way by these models, but by no means are they necessarily or consistently realised in all cases. So one of the main forms of value is energy independence, and this has two dimensions. The first of those is what we call autarky, and this refers to self-sufficiency or independence of energy supply. The other definition of energy independence is autonomy, and this refers to independent ownership and or decision making. The distinction here is that autarky is about whether you are generating your own power rather than getting it from somewhere else. And autonomy is whether you have ownership of energy resources and control over your decision making. So it's a question of agency. And the distinction is important here because which of the two a participant places more emphasis on may affect whether they're interested in participating in these models. For example, autarky is at odds with some objectives sought by these decentralized energy models, such as grid balancing, but autonomy may be consistent with participation provided that people feel that they're in control of the terms and conditions of their participation. Another social value associated with these models is that of local benefit or provenance. So this is the sense that benefits are created and retained in specific communities, whether they are geographic communities locally bounded or communities of practice more distributed across place. Another form of value is sharing and social relationships. We see in the literature that people value a sense of being able to work together, share what they have, look after others in their communities through, for example, sharing energy. Another social value is environmental responsibility, and this is the sense that people believe that they have a responsibility to address climate change and advance sustainability through promoting renewable energy, and they see participating in these models as one way to do that. And finally, another social value is that of participation. And this is the value derived from the participatory process itself. So some people see the being actively engaged in generating, managing their own energy as a sort of end in itself, and they value the outcomes of working together through that process. One context in which the energy independence offered by these sorts of models may be particularly valuable is during extreme weather events, where they may be able to support households and communities to continue to access power where there's been a wider grid outage. in Australia in recent years, we've had quite significant outages associated with extreme weather events, bushfires, flooding, storms, such as a statewide blackout in the state of South Australia in 2016. That event and others since have prompted calls to investigate options to better support people during those events. And one of the things that's being looked into now is microgrids. The microgrid in the diagram on the right there has now been established on the south coast of New South Wales, and is something that I've done some research on. This is essentially an islandable section of the grid. So normally the households and businesses in these towns are interacting with the wider grid in normal ways, but the local distribution network service provider can disconnect this section of the grid if necessary. And in that case, then this community can essentially become self-supporting. So it will they'll be generating and sharing all their own power during that wider outage. Turning now to the economic value associated with peer-to-peer community self-consumption and transactive energy models that we identified in our literature review. And again, these are the forms of value that people look for in these models. Whether one or more of these forms of value are realised in practice will depend very much on the model itself. But one of the main forms of value is self-consumption of electricity. So people benefit financially by utilising their self-generated energy at zero marginal cost. Another is reduced electricity import costs. So people are paying less for accessing their power from elsewhere than they would otherwise. Or conversely, increased electricity export prices, so they're getting more for sharing their electricity than they would otherwise. Another is the costs placed on the wider energy system. In some contexts, these models may offer a more efficient way of generating and sharing power among people than the grid does. And therefore is of economic value. Finally, local economic development may follow from these models in the form of the creation of jobs, for example, or support for businesses. In our literature review, we also looked at the factors and conditions behind the success of these models. Factors and conditions for success can relate to prospective participants' characteristics and preferences. And regional differences are relevant here, where social and cultural and institutional differences between places drive different attitudes. So for example, where there's already a strong sense of community, people may be more inclined to participate in one of these models, given that they tend to involve some degree of trust in their neighbours and institutional governing institutions. Demographic factors are of course also relevant, and the literature shows that younger, wealthier, more educated and less politically conservative people tend to be more interested in participating. Engagement in technology and renewable energy and the issue of climate change is also associated with a greater willingness to participate, unsurprisingly. And finally, complexity and transparency and trust are really important factors here. In particular, concerns about complexity, concerns about lack of financial transparency and inadequate data protection may deter participation. Factors and conditions for success also relate to the design and implementation of models. One factor here is household engagement. Successful trials have consistently involved strong household engagement. That means talking to people, answering their questions, addressing their concerns, ideally all in the design of the model before it's implemented. Another factor is community building and fostering a sense of being a part of a community. That appears in the literature as well as a factor behind success. Alignment or misalignment of project objectives and interests is another factor, where differing interests and expectations among actors can undermine success. For example, there can be differing expectations around the roles that different actors will be playing. One peer-to-peer trading scheme encountered difficulties when it became clear that household participants had come into it expecting to be playing a more active role than they had been given by the trial facilitators, and that led to significant defection from the trial. Finally, competition and tension between actors is another related factor where actually conflicting interests and objectives between actors can undermine these models as well, and that is something that we've seen where, for example, household participants may be looking to achieve equity within their communities, share energy within their communities. The trial facilitator may be most interested in stabilising prices and reducing peak demand, for example. These are objectives that can be at odds with one another, and you can't achieve all of these things. And where there has been where these things haven't been talked through, this can again lead to these models to sort of break down. I'll just share another example of the importance of that alignment of objectives and interests among all the stakeholders involved in a model. And this is based on a study of virtual power plants that I did with colleagues at the University of New South Wales. So virtual power plants are sort of a form of transactive energy with a third party acting as an aggregator and orchestrator of behind the meter assets, PV, batteries, electric vehicles, to deliver a range of grid services with financial benefits to the household participants of the virtual power plant. In this study, which focused on battery VPPs specifically, we talked to people about their willingness to participate in virtual power plants. None of them had yet signed up to one, so we were talking to prospective participants. But we started off first by asking them about why they had purchased a battery in the first place. And they told us that it was to enhance their energy security. So they had some protection against blackouts, they wanted more energy independence for using their own power and the financial savings associated with that. There were some factors to do with lifestyle and convenience. We then talked to them more about what a VPP would involve, and we discussed a range of VPP offerings with them. So these involved differing degrees of control on the part of the external, the aggregator, who would dispatch their battery or discharge their battery, into the grid in times of need, and in exchange for some financial benefit to them, and that took different forms depending on the particular offering. But as we were talking to the participants, it became clear that some of them were seeing a kind of inconsistency between their reasons for having bought a battery and the reasons why they might participate in a virtual power plant. So for example, one of them said to us, "I think it will depend on your mentality when you purchase the battery and why you're doing it, whether it's for you personally or if you're doing it as an investment." So some people saw the kind of personal reasons for having a battery to provide that security, that independence, the convenience, as at odds with their reasons, that the benefits of participating in a virtual power plant, which were primarily financial. Another said, "I think by virtue of me wanting solar to take some control of what I'm paying, and then to feel like at this stage I'm handballing that away and losing it again seems counterproductive." So there's this tension between their reasons for buying a battery and what a virtual power plant involves. And the reason I'm sharing this is because it's really important when we are designing models such as virtual power plants or the other sorts of models I've talked to you about, in thinking about why people would actually want to sign up and whether what we're offering them is actually consistent with their interests. I should say that this wouldn't be a problem for all participants. Some people were keen to kind of maximise financial benefit, but certainly for some it involved a little bit of a rethinking about the value of a battery for them. And some of them might be willing to participate in a virtual power plant if it on the balance of things that did make sense for them, but some may not. Some may want to just stick with their original the original purposes that they had in mind when they bought a battery. So it's important to understand these things. So I've given you just a very brief high-level overview of the current research on distributed energy models from the point of view of the participation of households and small businesses. If you'd like more information about any of this, I've provided some links here to the articles and studies that I've referred to. I've also put my email address there, and I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to point you in the direction of more resources if that would be helpful. I'm very sorry to not have been able to be there in person to talk and to take questions, but I hope you're having a wonderful conference, and I hope to be there next time. Thank you.